Hi, this is Jeff Brim from NxT5 Advisors, another one of our innovation interviews. And once again, we have Terry Schussler from Deutsche Telekom here to give us another interview. Thank you, Terry, for joining us again.
Pleasure.
Terry was here. We were here this last couple days at the VRX conference here, and Terry had a panel, and he was talking about some things I thought would be very interesting for the viewers to hear about. And so you were talking about momentary AR and
Right.
time
Durative.
yes. So can you explain that for me? I hadn't heard that term. But
Sure. So most of the applications today that people use on mobile phones that are utilizing augmented reality technology are very short-term experiences. So I call them momentary AR experiences because you're using Pokemon Go and you're doing a selfie with a Pokemon, or you're in the Harry Potter Wizards Unite game and you walk into a port key experience to do a brief AR portal type of game element, and it's 10-15 second experience. And Snapchat, which is probably the most popular AR platform, although a lot of people don't think of it as an AR platform, 10 seconds at a time, right, for every snap. So these are the common experiences, and most of the other types of applications, measuring apps and things like that, tend to be fairly short-term use case, where you're going to pull the phone out, you're going to look at a piece of furniture from IKEA in your living room, and again, 15-30 seconds. How long are you going to stare at that before you move on, right? So in the B2B side of things, because that's more the B2C or consumer use cases, in the B2B side, most of the projects are very, short time, very focused, very vertical types of use cases, solving a very specific problem or augmenting people with a very specific problem. And even in those contexts, the use cases tend to be like 10 minutes, 15 minutes long. So it's hard to create real traction with the value proposition of head-worn devices and AR in general if you just use it for only a few seconds once or twice a day.
Right.
And so for me, the transition from in the B2B space, building lots of pilots and prototypes and innovation showcases, transitioning to productization means that you've got to build an application that has a more time derivative value to the user. So, and I believe very strongly that this will be necessary to transition from mobile AR to head-worn AR in the consumer space. So specifically, as an example, with on the B2B side, you need to solve more complex problems. Tools that enable complex communications between people in different locations. Those spatial collaboration tools will become disruptive B2B solutions next year. Because now you're going to disrupt the WebEx, the Skype, the Zoom, sort of ecosystem by adding a layer of real collaboration, not just, screen sharing and file sharing, but like creation, design sharing and sort of ideation sharing in real time. While actually increasing the level of person-to-person feeling, that you have, because there's a big difference between looking at somebody's face on a flat video screen and seeing them, even with an avatar representation, spatially next to you. Like we're sitting here, but you're in London and I'm in San Francisco. On the consumer side,
How do you know I'm not in London right now?
well, yeah, there you go. Because I can touch you.
There we go. Well,
and
but
so
that's
the
the
haptics
haptic part.
Yeah, so that's the next layer, right? We will work from the auditorium visual side to integrate the tactile senses, and then I can see you, I can hear you, I can touch you, I can smell you, maybe even down the road. Hopefully not. But so the on the consumer side, it'll be a little bit different, because on the consumer side, it's going to be a matter of two possible models. First, and I think this is what we'll be focusing on next year, are the time derivative use cases, where I'm going to put on my AR glasses and I'm going to spend an hour to 3 hours doing some experience in the real world that's now enhanced with digital content experience. So this would be, for example, in tourism. If I'm traveling in a new city and walking around the city center of a country or of a city I've never been to, maybe I can get a tour, a walking tour with a character with agency in AR taking me around and saying, go look to your left and look to your right, and I see him pointing, and then I look at those things and I get extra content information. So I'm still looking at the real world, but I'm getting that extra layer, and I'm doing it for an hour to 3 hours. Or if I'm going to a sporting event, I'm at a stadium, I want to have like the full, I want to be able to drink beer and high five my neighbor and all of those things. But I also want to get that personalized digital content experience that I can't get just sitting in a stadium chair.
Right.
So the other option, and the one that I think we're arcing to over the next 3 years or so, is having these moment-to-moment AR experiences constantly. So it's frequency of use, even though the time duration is really short.
Right.
And that will be the transition that will take some time, because to go from a time derivative use case model to a moment-to-moment flow of use case model requires a complete ecosystem change on the software side. So instead of what I call the app-first ecology that we have today, where I pull my device in my hand and I scroll through my apps and I launch an app and I'm in that app. I put a head-worn device, I scroll through the apps, I tap, I launch, or with the controller, and I'm in that app. And then I switch to another app, and I'm in that app. That modality is going to change to, I have a Waze service, I have a Yelp service, I have an OpenTable service, I have an SMS service, and maybe a customizable, like I have a navigation service, and I choose to use the Waze version of the navigation service. I have a calendar service, and I choose to use the Google version versus the iCal, calendar version. And those services will need to intelligently and in real time share data with each other and create a flow of moment-to-moment experiences as a continuity throughout the day. And that's going to then justify me putting AR glasses on and wearing them all day long. And I would say to you that the Apple Watch is a good model for what that kind of an ecosystem will look like, because today the Apple Watch has two sort of user interaction models. So it's one that's called glance, and when I glance at my watch, I spend 0 to 5 seconds glancing to get a piece of data, just by flipping my wrist up to my face, right? And then the other is what's called complication, where I tap or spin the crown or do some sort of physical gesture to interact with the watch, because I want to do a little bit deeper dive and get an extra layer of information. And so a complication is a 5 to 15 second content interaction. Again, momentary, right? So the interaction model here, I think, fits very well with that next layer of future head-worn experience. And that staging, first use cases that transform real-world experiences in such a dramatic way that I put the device on for an hour to 3 hours and I'm really in that experience, and I really tangibly benefit my life from having that. So good that even just one of those encourages me to want to lease or buy the glasses, get the technology hardware necessary to make that happen. That will then create the traction and act as an inflection point for then encouraging the industry to look beyond the app first to a people first ecosystem. The people first ecosystem is thinking about the user, not the app. Thinking about what the user wants, what they're at that moment, where they're looking, where they're located, what their predictive flow of physical spatial movement is, what their calendar says is on their to-dos, everything. And all of that will then just help.
The person you're looking for.
Yeah, so it's
your
the
LinkedIn
personalized
person, he's coming nearby, so you know.
Exactly. So it's the personalized experience that is contextualized to where the user is and what they're doing. It's personalized to their preferences in terms of the types of services, and prioritized based on what they think is more important. Very important to consider that not only do we have the reality that our eyes only see about 14 degrees in a clear, sort of field of view, everything else is sort of, blurry. So that's the whole foveated rendering model. But also cognitively, we can only really consume about 3 unique pieces of additional information, that focus points, before we get into a cognitive overload situation. So choosing which 3 pieces of information, or 1 to 3 pieces of information, flow in front of the user as we go from time to time, that's super important. And that requires a real difference in the ecosystem design of software.
Right, and everybody would be able to personalize where they want that information to be.
Yeah,
right?
where they want it.
You may want it here, you may want it over there.
Preferential, like, do I want to put it on blank spaces in the world around me, like use the blank area of the table, use the blank wall, the proximity of that information, the coloring of it, everything needs to be contextually personalized to that user.
All right.
So that's, to me, the how we go from pilot to productization with AR in particular, but also even with VR use cases.
So do you think we could do that in 2020, or is that a 2022, 23 type?
No, I think we are, because I think we've now identified the main areas of opportunity with consumer head-worn AR, where there's an opportunity for disruption and where there's clear value proposition for the technology being layered into a real-world experience. Tourism, shopping, travel, even exercise is another one, and so we now believe that it's worth taking the risk to building those products, not pilots, and pushing them into the marketplace. You have to, as I mentioned in one of my panels, you have to show people what good looks like by taking a bit of a leap. And then, and then illustrating. In order to lead, in order to drive the market, somebody has to step up and say, this is the vision, and here's a good example of what the future will look like, and buy into it and sell it. Yeah.
So let's go on to another topic.
Okay.
One that we didn't talk about beforehand. So, I've been working in Australia this year and stuff like that, and one of the things I was looking at was 5G apps.
Okay.
What are apps that are going to require 5G? Because when I look out here, I don't see anything requiring 5G. I'll have a faster LTE app.
Right.
But are you guys at Telecom working on 5G required apps?
Yes.
Apps that require 5G?
Yeah.
And what are those? What's different about those than, say, an LTE app?
So the answer is yes. I think the reason you don't see a lot of apps is, the reality is that 5G is still in an early stage of infrastructure build-out, rollout. So, you can only see those kind of experiences in sort of limited, sort of locations, city centers and things like that. The other reality is people try to they ideate opportunities and they figure out a way to make it work with today's technology. So, I think the first phase is going to be taking applications that could work in 4G and making them demonstrably better because of 5G. Right. Scaling them up in some way, adding some layer of functionality
some edge compute.
Well, just like increasing the quality of the render, or increasing the resolution of the video stream,
Sure.
or enabling some layer of personalization on the content, that might not be doable with today's 4G LTE infrastructure. Edge compute is sort of a bridge in that regards, because edge compute doesn't need 5G. It works equally well with or without 5G. In fact, in some cases, it might be considered that it adds more value in a 4G world than it does in a 5G world, because inherently 4G has more latency, has less bandwidth, right? I think as the 5G releases come out and we see additional layers of intrinsic core radio functionality, you're going to see more 5G specific and only apps.
Right.
So we're doing experimental work with 5G only things, where we're looking at certainly bandwidth, right? So we just broadcast the Berlin Marathon live through 5G phones on cars, follow cars and lead cars, shooting the runners, and so the whole event was broadcast live through 5G, radio connected phones. So, that enabled really high quality video that we could not reliably do on a 4G LTE ecosystem. So that's a good example.
Sure.
Then we start looking at the other value propositions of 5G, density-related proposition, right? So if you have tens of thousands of people in a stadium connecting to try to get some sort of personalized experience. I mean, here we're at a conference with 300 people in a hotel, and people are complaining because they can't download, anything.
Log in.
They can't even log into the internet, let alone, get connected to it. And so clearly, the density going from 10,000 people per square kilometer to 1 million people per square kilometer having access to highly reliable, high bandwidth connectivity. That's a big differential. That really changes the game for a lot of mass applications or applications with a lot of users concurrently using the network. The releases for 5G radio later on and things that we're looking at are like trying to create a more highly reliable network, a more predictively reliable network, right? So this is where we look at using machine learning to model in the core how the network's performing, what the kind of applications the user's using requires in terms of network characteristics, and then giving the application intrinsics about what the predicted behavior of the network's going to be. What is your latency going to be moment to moment as you are doing things. So if we're starting to do things like cloud gaming, streaming VR on the edge or on the backhaul, those intrinsics become really, really important for the application to give a good user experience.
Right.
And that's also going to be important. Where I really get excited is the stuff that people aren't talking about yet, like precise positioning. So as we start looking intelligently at the evolution of the chipsets and the modem sets in the phones and the network core, being able to know where somebody is with a real accurate and much more granular measurement than GPS, indoor as well as out, even without millimeter wave radio, then that means that I can start doing, I can spatially localize you way more accurately to geo-anchored AR content, and it changes the game. It's sort of like the story I would tell somebody is, what would your life be if there was no signal bars on your phone? Because when you turn your phone on and you could see that it was powered on, you had a consistently reliable connection to the internet all the time. How would you, with this whole login model and the whole way we work with Wi-Fi, imagine if all of that pain point went away. How would that change the way that your software operates and the way you use your phone as a device? So I believe that that's coming over time as we build out infrastructure. And as the releases come out to enable this kind of precise positioning and sort of more reliable predictive network experience, it's going to really enable entirely new classes of use cases that can make assumptions. Because right now we can't make assumptions. And in fact, what happens is a lot of sloppy developers make assumptions and the network's always there, and then they just fail miserably when the network dies.
Or the bandwidth.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We had that on the web pages, right?
Yeah,
People loaded up those high with the graphics. And
things just completely break. I mean, even well tested under large scaling condition games like Niantic's Pokemon Go or Harry Potter Wizards Unite game. If a classic example is I try playing Harry Potter Wizards Unite as a passenger in a car at 60 miles an hour with handoffs between cell towers, and the game just breaks flat out. I mean, it literally restarts itself, crashing, because it can't handle those kind of network conditions at all. So that is a great example in my mind of what would change if we have this ultra reliable network. And you don't have to worry about how many people are in the room, or whether it's indoors or outdoors, and whether I'm on a hotel Wi-Fi or not. I mean, I don't even need to see the need for Wi-Fi starts to go away, because and reliably in say 10 years, the 5G radio vision is to turn the entire world into a global hotspot. And one might argue that satellite might come into play here too, with SpaceX launch of a mobile platform. If they're successful, that they may even bring that to the table even sooner, at least conceptually.
Right. That
you can be anywhere and have. I mean, so like Iridium, Motorola's Iridium platform. Anywhere you go, you can use a satellite phone, and you got some level of connectivity to the world.
All right, I have a couple more questions here
All
for
right.
you. One is around one of my favorite topics that got highly promoted: network slicing.
Yeah.
All right, I saw earlier this week that the telecoms are now not Deutsche Telekom, but the different telecoms are now saying, by the way, that's how we're going to make our money in 5G is selling network slicing.
Right.
So network slicing is not in this release.
That's correct.
So it's in some current future release.
Yeah.
So
Quite a bit
what
out.
do you? Yeah.
I believe it's 2022 or 23. I think that's when it's scheduled. Yeah.
Right. And so
Yeah.
as you look at apps
Yeah.
or products that you're bringing out that are 5G,
Yeah.
so there's really a 5G light, because if really where the telecoms are going to make money is on the network slicing.
So
How do you get to that point? Right?
So the short term is that campus networks will create a viable business opportunity for telcos to sell 5G radio into large corporation customer situations using public and private slices, right?
Okay.
And you know what it really ultimately, in my opinion, boils down to is data privacy and reliability, right? So the SLA that you can guarantee with a private network slice, and the reliability of the network, and the federation of the data become very critical to large corporations, and they're willing to pay for that guarantee. They're willing to pay for that.
There's no SLA with this current version of 5G.
That's right, but in a private slice controlled environment, there is an SLA that can be offered, and because you're controlling the literal hardware configuration, the radio configuration of the network. So it becomes the value prop that the network provider puts on, or the telco puts on the table with the customer, and they're going to charge for it, so they'll make money with that, right? So that's why the point I was making just a moment ago about reliability being so important to the consumer, even more important to the large B2B customer. And then the data federation is also a very key part, because for privacy rights, and companies aren't like consumers. They're not going to click a checkbox that says I agree to the EULA and go ahead and take my data and do whatever the heck you want with it. They're absolutely not going to allow that. So then you have to be able to guarantee control over that data. They have legal, and ethical and business responsibilities to do so. That's the short term. That's today. That's campus networks today being built out, then you'll see an acceleration of 5G deployments in campus, I think, over this year.
Acceleration will be based off of, jumping off of the campus ones?
Well, I think it'll create business value and growth, through revenue to build out more 5G infrastructure, right? Then you look at the network slicing. So the big problem with network slicing is interoperator data transfers, right? Because it only works to the point of the peering point, So you really basically networking slicing only really works well within the operator ecosystem. A multi-operator ecosystem, network slicing is down the road quite a way, and maybe never happens, because it requires, the sort of level of agreement that what's important to you is also going to be important to me. So once the data hits my network, I will treat it with the same guarantees and prioritizations that you offered to your customers, and that's like dealing with like data roaming, in Europe, right? It took a long time before there was sort of data roaming agreements between operators, so that everybody said, we'll all try to play fair and nice with each other, so our discrete customers all get kind of the same benefit. And they, and even at that, they're still not doing it at full data rates, right? Like when you roam, onto another operator, you're roaming, but you're at like, you might be at 2G or 3G data rates. You're not at 4G.
Right.
So I think network slicing is a really awesome concept, but I think you'll see a lot of simulations of the ideas of it intrinsic before there's official release support for it. And then even when release support comes out, my gut tells me it's still going to stay inside the operator ecosystem for a while.
Yeah, I remember being
and
at Telecom, we had
this kind of talk doesn't really make sense to the average consumer. What does it mean? But I think it's important to sort of qualify what we're talking about when we talk about networking slicing. It's just saying that, I have different types of applications that I'm going to operate on my phone or my head-worn device, which have different up and downstream requirements in terms of bandwidth, reliability, latency, precision of positioning, and density support, and all of those things. And so if I'm able to identify a sort of preset for that type of application, then I can configure the network for that application, for that user, to prioritize the up and down paths and functionality according to the needs of that
And
application,
security.
and security and everything else. Yeah. So
So
that's
it becomes its own VPN.
it's like a dynamic VPN per user per app. And but with an optimized network flow, so that you know you're going to get the best possible experience for that situation. And then there's sort of a meta view of like, okay, that's great that you want all of that, but I also have to accommodate all these other users. So now we have to prioritize the user packages so that overall we don't bust something, right? Because we might say, well, we have 50,000 people that want to do real time. They want to do Facebook Live from a stadium event, and we can't handle that. So somebody's going to get lower bandwidth. Somebody's going to get no bandwidth. How does that work?
All right, so last question, because I want to be able to let you toot your horn a bit. So today I was reading in the newspaper Beethoven's birthday.
Newspaper?
Well, it was online newspaper. It was
LinkedIn.
No, it was an online.
It's not a newspaper.
Yeah, it wasn't LinkedIn, but it was an
okay.
online.
All right.
Online newspaper.
All right, there you go.
Online, I was reading. But thank you for catching me on that. It's an old phrase.
What's a newspaper?
Yeah, none of the young people will know what is a newspaper. But when we were there, before I left, we were working on some stuff around Beethoven's birthday coming up.
That's right.
And then I saw in the paper today that Deutsche Telekom's working on this AI to finish the Beethoven's 10th Symphony.
Right. Yeah.
So, can you tell us a little bit? I mean, I was happy to hear it. Sounds like great stuff. And I guess you tried it on the 9th, and you're going to use it to try to finish off the 10th.
That's right. So, so I'll talk about the project that I was involved with, which is the Beethoven 2020 AR app. So this is the goal of this app was to not only celebrate Beethoven, but to create an outdoor time derivative mobile AR application where you would walk around the city center of Bonn, where it's the birthplace of Beethoven, and go through some of the key points of interest related to Beethoven, and he would actually walk with you in AR and tell you stories about these points of interest from the point of view of a 22-year-old Beethoven. And
because he didn't live his whole life there.
That's right.
He was only born into his young adulthood.
That's correct. So we selected 7 of the 15 key tourist points of interest within the city center, and we take the user, on a journey in AR with their phone in the first iteration, and then eventually I want to bring that on the head-worn devices, so that you're hands-free,
put them
phone's
in
in your pocket, and away you go. And so that's available today for iOS and for Android. That just launched on the app stores.
Oh,
so
very good.
You can actually use it in both German and English, and you don't even have to be in Bonn, because we built it so that you can do one simulated POI and the tutorial part of it anywhere. Right. So that way you can get a taste of the experience without having to be in Bonn.
And it's on the App Store where?
In the Apple App Store and the Google. It's under BTHVN 2020.
BTHVN 2020.
Right, which is sort of the abbreviation for the celebration.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Because I remember that was one of the last things I was working on there.
That's
was
right.
Stefan. And we were going down there. I went down to different places. One of the challenges was that some of these buildings don't exist anymore.
That's correct.
And so how did you render those buildings? And
so in this case, we use physical existing POIs that are already there, statues and things like that, that are already visible, and where we could spatially anchor content on reference material and things like that. Yeah. The other project, actually, I'm not personally involved in. So I can't really talk a lot about it, but I was also reading it with quite fascination. We just announced that. But what I like about it, from a consumer, user point of view, is this idea of using machine learning for things besides computer vision, right? Because AI as a general topic is like 50 subtopics of information.
Just checking to see whether I get low.
All right. So AI is 50 subtopics of information, but in fact, people don't see it that way. So we have everything from speech recognition to computer vision and so on, all being AI topics. For me, machine learning has been correlated almost one-to-one with computer vision, but there's so much more to it than that. And the idea of actually interpolating data of an auditorial nature and then and then creating something based on that is quite amazing, and I'm really excited to see it.
Yeah, I was at the ARS Electronica Museum, which is in Linz, Austria, and if you go to that, it's a digital arts museum.
Right.
And if you go in there, they have taken music and tried to do some version of making it into color. And then they also used Google's Magenta, which is an AI tool on music.
Yeah.
And you could pick a song and say, this is the way Chopin would play it, this is the way Beethoven would play it. And then they also worked
That's
on...
like art filters. That I want a Picasso style art.
Right.
I want to draw like Picasso.
Right.
That kind of thing. Yeah. So there's a lot of interesting opportunities. But again, most of these are visual. So doing it with audio content is really cool.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of opportunity there.
They had that.
Yeah.
And they were also finishing symphonies in that one as well.
Yeah.
And so there's a number. I was surprised how many symphonies that hadn't been completed by these the great. If you think about it, that would make sense.
Sure.
So, but anyway, thanks Terry for this. We kind of ran out of our video part, but we still had the audio going, so
Very
we're still
good.
good.
Awesome.
We're going podcast now.
Okay. Cool.
Right.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Terry.
A lot of fun.